Hello everyone, it's Rider here, and I'm doing a follow-up video to my "We Don't Get Enough New Characters" video. And as I mentioned before in my unboxing, that essentially I think it ruffled a few feathers. I think a few people had taken this the wrong way. And I was just basically talking about 3 cool new characters that we hadn't seen before that we had toys of. So some people kind of took that as I was talking about the reuse of moulds, I was talking about G1 characters and all that kind of stuff. So I wanted to put it a little bit to bed. But the main person who was commenting was someone called Mary Autumn. Pointed out correctly that there were 10 new characters, including torchbearers and all that kind of stuff in the Combiner Wars line. Well, not necessarily true, because RC was still an established character. Yes, it was a new imagining of that character. Viper, yeah, it was a new Transformer. That was from the G.I. Joe line. But basically, their point is essentially that everything goes back to G1. There's too much G1. Not everyone was born in the 80s, and there is never a new mould just for a new character that wasn't based on G1. And in a nutshell, I mean, what I'll do is I'll pop up the messages here so you can have a read of them yourself if you want to have a look. But essentially the point is that all roads point back to G1. So I thought, you know what? I talked about Combiner Wars. Let's pick a more recent line. So I've picked Siege. And what I've done is I've basically got all the toys that were released within the Siege line, which is about 57 from the deluxe size to the leader size. So I've discounted the commander class, I've discounted the Titan class, I've also discounted the weaponizers below and the Micromasters, just for this test, because let's face it, the bulk of the line has always been those deluxes, those Voyagers and those leaders. So that's what I'm focusing on, and there was 57 different releases across those, according to my calculations. Some of them did come with Micromasters and Target Masters and all that kind of stuff, but I'm discounting those and just having the main figure. So for example, with the Hotlink set, I've discounted the 2 Target Masters that came with Hotlink, but I've counted Hotlink, and I've also counted the Netflix Siege figures within this little piece of analysis. So what did I find out? Well, I categorised them in 2 ways. I categorised them whether they were in G1 as their primary source of exposure to the Transformers world. But I also put some other categories in there. So you've got G1, they basically appeared in the G1 cartoon. You've got G1 accessories. So these are toys that were essentially accessories, like the weaponizers, like Cog, for example. He was just an accessory. So I've categorised that different, because even though it comes in G1, it was just an accessory. So this is almost a reimagining, that was easy for me to say, of that character. On top of that, I've put a category as G1 and IDW. Now, what that means is there are certain characters that really, they had no exposure in the Transformers cartoon, maybe some in the original comics, but really come to light in IDW. So Spinner, Stat and Skytread are perfect examples of that. Movies, so obviously characters that become renowned for their time from in the movies. Barricade is the example of that. And we've got other Transformers toy lines like Cybertron, we've got RID 2001, we've got even pre-Transformers stuff like Shockwave from Tandy's, if those of you remember that. Energon, Shattered Glass, and also new characters, because there were new characters that we hadn't seen before. So let's look at the first stat, and this is like where they originated from. So, Mary is right that the majority of this line originated from Generation 1. That's 68%, roughly. However, as you will rightly know, a lot of these characters that originated in G1 had greater exposure in the IDW comics and become icons because of that. So the good example of that is Ratchet, Prowl. all of these were original G1 characters, but were given a new light by the IDW comics, and therefore they did originate in G1. But the caveat for this chunk is they have been a key part of many other lines since. Now, Mary did make a great point about we won't get another animated Prowl and all that kind of stuff, which is an absolutely fantastic point, because that was a great way of reimagining a character. But there has been other reimaginings done, as I mentioned, about the Weaponizers and even the Power Dashers. Those have been reimagined from what they were. Not to the extent that animated Prowl was, but nevertheless still a slight reimagining there. And I'll put Slam Dance within that as well, that we got in the 2-pack. We also got some representations from Generation 2. So Generation 2, we had a couple of figures of that. About 3.5% of this line had an origin in G2. G1 accessories, I said that before, about 5.3%. G1 and IDW, 5.3%. RID 2001, 3.5%. Brand new characters that I have not seen before, 3.5%. IDW on its own, and I counted the Spartan Impactor as this, 1.8%, so nearly 2%. So one thing we will say from this is there is a lot of... We are heavily weighted towards Generation 1. But for people who say it is just G1, I'm not saying you're wrong. The data says you're wrong. The stats say you're wrong. There is a lot of different variants that feed into these lines, especially the Siege line. There's a lot of variants. And because of that, and we need to remember as well, as I've said before, a lot of foundations do lie in G1. IDW comics, I mean, how many toy lines haven't had an Optimus Prime in? And there is, I think, 3 different versions of that here. So, you know what? Yes, agree with you. G1 is a big chunk. But only about 2/3 of it. Because 1/3 of this line actually had origins or elsewhere, or reimaginations of things from G1 we haven't seen before. I found that really interesting. And this is just based on the data. This is not based on opinion, this is based on data. So, there was another point made about the moulds, which is a valid point. Because you know what? We do get a lot of mould reuse. And of course you will, because let's face it, right, Hasbro are a business. They're not going to invent just a toy, a specific toy that only has one mould for anyone. Are they? Well, actually, in this line, they did. They did do it a few times, actually. They gave us a bespoke mould for Astro Train, which I know was reused in Earthrise, but for this line, it wasn't reused within the line. Springer wasn't reused within the line. 8-Face wasn't reused in that line, only one. And interestingly, Spinester. So you can argue that 75% of those unique moulds that only have one figure originated in G1. And yes, I know that Spinester was a G1 figure, but he's renowned for his time in the Scavengers in IDW. He's got a bit of a fan base from there. So, actually, from that point of view, even though he did have a G1 toy, this character has got a bespoke mould just for him. Just like A-Face, just like Springer, just like Astro Train, right? Okay. But interestingly, out of those moulds only used once, 25% of them were not solely G1, not solely based on G1 designs. Interesting. The other point is there were some heavy reuses, absolutely heavy reuses. We all know the Seekers, right? 8 different reuses of that Seeker mould. 8 different. 8 Voyager size figures. And if you say those go at around 25 quid, Well, that's 200 quid's worth of Seeker there. Let's face it, I know the Hotlit one's 40 quid. I know the Rainmakers go for about 100, 120 quid now, so you're going to be paying a lot more of that. But that's a lot of reuse. A lot of reuse. But people went mad for them. And we hadn't had, even though there was some links to G1, some of those figures we haven't had before. We haven't had a hot link and all that kind of stuff, which is great. The Chromia mould, I'm calling it the Chromia mould, but it actually goes back to the Moonracer mould that I think we've had 4 times before Siege, or 3 times before Siege. In Siege line, there is 5 different uses of that mould. In my opinion, one of the worst Transformers moulds ever made. That's opinion, that's not fact, by the way, that's my opinion. I think it's awful. I think it's really, really awful. I've owned it twice, sold it twice. Yeah, I had Moonracer and I had Nightbird. Yeah, reuses of that mould 5 times. Interestingly, quite interesting. The other reuse, other highest ones then were then tied between Megatron and Prowl. The Prowl mould. So the Megatron mould was used 4 times. The Prowl mould was used 4 times. That's a lot of reuse, right? And in my opinion, if you reuse a figure twice in a line, I can kind of accept that as a repaint. Anything more than that, you're pushing it. But then again, with Seekers and with the Datsuns, we expect it because we've had it from day dot. I know everyone wasn't born in the 80s. I get that, but these characters are still based on those designs and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so I thought that is quite interesting looking at the data. So what does it tell us? What does it actually tell us? Well, it says that Hasbro do reuse some moulds. They reuse some more than others. Seekers, Datsuns, which have always have done. It's a cash cow. Make one mould, sell 8 of them. But they're not afraid of giving us really, what's the word I'm looking for? Niche, yeah, niche characters like Spinnerstar getting their own mould, and I think that's interesting. I think that's really, really interesting. Now, for those of you that say that it's all G1 and all that kind of stuff, this just proves that essentially you are wrong. Even if you take in those G1 accessories, kind of it, and you take in the G1 side of the IDW stuff, you're still looking about 25%-ish that sit outside that. Now, I know that some people out there want Beast Wars. I know some people want other representations of characters. But you know what? Hasbro will continue to make Optimus Primes. They will continue to make Megatrons. They will continue to make Bumblebees. I'm shocked we haven't had one already in this trilogy. They'll continue to make Seekers because people will continue to buy them. Will they go ahead and make a random character that no one has heard of before? Maybe. They did that before, and that was my point with Rook and all of that lot. But there's no guarantee it's going to sell, is there? And the clever thing what they did in Combiner Wars is they released those moulds first. And we've seen that a few times with pre-tools and all of that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, what is the message in all this? It's pretty simple for me. Don't get upset about it. They're bloody toys, for God's sake. I mean, there's a lot more stuff going on in this bleeding world at this moment in time than worrying about the fact that you're having G1 characters bought out again and again and again. It doesn't matter, does it really? There's a lot more things that we need to worry about. There's a lot more people. If you're worrying about that kind of stuff, if you're getting upset about that kind of stuff, then you're a really, really lucky person. Because there's people out there who have it a lot worse than you and are worrying about a lot worse than the fact that Prowl is getting a reissue again in the Earthrise, whatever it is. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I've been Zort Rider, and I'll catch you again soon.